Well, good morning and Shabbat Shalom. I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein. This is Valley Best Shalom Torah Study for a Shabbos morning. Joined this morning by my dear friends and colleagues and teachers, Rabbi Sherre Hirsch of the American Jewish University and Rabbi Marc Gellman of South Florida and Melville, New York, and a national podcast star today.
We're about to launch.
Wonderful. So welcome. It's good to have you both here. Well, when I was a kid in Hebrew school, they taught us that Abraham was the first Jew because he was the one who discovered monotheism. He was the first one to follow the God who would become, after all, the God of Israel. He was the progenitor of the Jewish people. But I remember for my bar mitzvah essay, I wrote a little essay to my rabbi, just being the contrarian teenager that I was, that Abraham wasn't the first Jew. Isaac was the first Jew, partially because my Hebrew name is Yitzchak, and I wanted to claim that privilege. But more than that, I wrote in my little essay to my rabbi that to be a Jew is to reckon with your parents' spirituality, with the legacy that you inherit from generations before you, and figure out how to reconcile their way of looking at the world, their faith, their spirituality, their ethic, their religious life, with your own, with the previous generations' visions of the world and their values, with the values that speak to the world that we live in. And that's what this Torah portion begins to present for us. This is the story of Father Isaac. Now, Father Isaac, among the patriarchs of Israel, Father Isaac is passive. Everything seems to be done to him. He's object rather than subject, except for one scene, which we're going to talk about in just a moment. He's the one who is the object of the Akedah. It's called Akedat Yitzchak, the binding of Isaac, but Isaac doesn't do anything except lay there, right? And then now we get into the story of Isaac passing on the legacy of this birthright, the legacy of the mantle of the covenant to his two sons, Esau and Jacob. And the question is how he negotiates that transaction of receiving from Abraham and then passing on to his sons, to Esau and Jacob, is the story of this week's Torah portion. And right away, we're told that Isaac and Rebekah, his wife, have two kids. They're twins. They have a conflict in utero, and Mama Rebekah cries out, Ma Anochi, why am I alive if this is what being a mother is all about? And then the two boys are born into the world, one grasping onto the heel of the other. And there is a conflict between the two, and they are opposite of each other. In mythology, very frequently, a twin means one person who's divided in half. And half of the character, the power, the strength, the resolution, the courage, the violence, the aggressiveness goes to Esau, and the other half goes to Jacob. Jacob, who is Ish Tam, smooth man, a man who talks well, a man who does the New York Times crossword puzzle with a pen, a man who drinks lattes and wears nice clothes and doesn't go outside. And the conflict between these two very different characters is the story of this week's Torah portion. It begins with the birth. Then there are two major scenes. The first scene is Esau comes in from the field famished and Jacob is cooking. Well, that's already an interesting image of the two different visions of masculinity. The masculinity of the hunter who goes out and wrestles alligators and bears, and the masculinity of the Bobby Flay character who whips up a beautiful lentil stew. And then he says, feed me this before I die, says Esau. And Yaakov says, fine, sell me your birthright. And he says, take it, what do I need it for? And hands him the stew. And then the beautiful verse in the book of Genesis, there's 5 verbs in a row with no break, right? He sat down and he ate and he drank and he got up and he left. Vayesh, Vayachov, one after the other. There's no reflection. There's no savoring. There's no tasting. He's just wolfing down his food. And that's the image, wolfing down, because he is man as beast. Man as beast. And then we get to the end of the story. And it's time for Yitzchak, Isaac, to pass a blessing on to his two sons. And the Torah tells us that Yitzchak had an affection for Esau. He had an affection for his wolf son, his beastly son. probably because of his passivity, he projects his own need for strength and aggressiveness onto his son and enjoys that power that his son imbibes. And it was Rebecca, the mother, who enjoyed Yaakov. And when Esau is sent out to go hunt game for his father and bring it back for the blessing, Rebecca says to her other son, to Yaakov, go dress up your brother's clothes, fix a meal, and we will steal the blessing. And the ensuing scene is this remarkable scene in which Yaakov enters the bedroom of his father, the tent of his father, and steals the blessing from his brother, steals the blessing from the father. Not a pretty scene. Not a pretty scene at all. Not an ethic that we would want in any way passed on. So the question I want to start with is, why do we tell this story? Why is this story here? If I want to present a Torah to my children, and I want Torah to say to my kids, like, be like this. And after all, we're his kids. We are Bnei Yisrael. We are the children of Jacob. We are the children of Yaakov. Why this story? And what is in this story that we can hold on to? So good morning, rabbis. It's wonderful to have you here. Let's begin with this question, and then we'll talk about what it means to steal a birthright and steal a blessing from your brothers and sisters. Marc, do you have siblings? You have siblings, right? And I know Sherre has siblings. I have siblings.
The eldest of four, which means it's all about me.
Yeah.
I am the eldest. I am the one. My grandmother called me Yahweh, little God.
Yahweh?
Yahweh, that's what she called me. And it sunk in, unfortunately.
That's what they say.
There's definitely tensions. There's definitely difficulties. And yes, the answer is yes.
So what does the story teach? Why is the story here? What is it pointing to?
For me, the story, which is a horrible story, you're exactly right, and terribly negative to women and to Rebecca particularly, of course. To me, the message is, listen, folks, this is not a novel. In a novel, the characters are the heroes. In the Bible, in the Tanakh, in the Torah, God is the hero. And that's the difference. These people are not meant to be our heroes. They're just our progenitors. They're our forefathers and foremothers. And so it's really God who's the hero. And what God is showing in this story is that you have to overcome your baser instincts. And if you don't do that, you can't be my people and you can't follow me. And there's a story, if you'll allow me, which is my favorite, one of my top 5 favorite of all time stories, which is a story of a Cherokee chief who takes his grandchildren out into the forest and sits them down and says, I want to tell you, children, a story that within me there is a war going on between 2 wolves. One is the wolf of kindness and love, and the other is the wolf of killing and hatred. And those wolves are at war within me. And the one grandchild says, grandfather, which wolf will win? And the chief says to his grandchildren, the wolf that will win is the wolf you feed. And that to me is what this story is about. Feed the right wolf that we all have within us. 2 wolves. We've got a wolf that wants what we want, that wants to manipulate people, that wants to lie, to make us look better, all sorts of bad motives. The Yetzer Hara is part of that melange of evilness within us. But there's also the image of God. There's also the goodness within us, the Yetzer Tov. And this is the first explication by God of the way we have a choice. When we say we have freedom of the will, what we really mean is we have freedom to choose the bad wolf or the good wolf.
Sherre, I know you have a brother, but you're raising 5 kids in a home and
So
extraordinary kids. So you've had experiences in both sides of this.
yes, so I would just first about siblings. I have a brother and I have two stepsisters, and then I had two almost other step siblings, which was that my father never got married to the woman that he was with for a long time. So I've had many, and then I have what I also call my husband's siblings and their spouses. And for someone who's always craved sibling relationship, this parsha is one of the most profound for me because I think the Torah, if it totally told us stories that were like, and the siblings got along great, and they played together, and they sat together, and they ate together, it wouldn't reflect what the human experience is, right? We learn as much from the Torah, both from what not to do, but also what to do. And I think the honesty of the Torah in this portion about the conflict about siblings, about who's born first, who's born second, what did you get? What did you not get? Is so powerful because with my own children, there's a constant dialogue going like, he gets more, she gets more. At 16, you let him do this. At 16, you didn't let him do this. And I'm always like, stop this madness of who's fair, who's right, and whatnot. So I'm fascinated by Toldot, and I'm very touched by this story because had it been that the two brothers were besties and they got along great and they walked off into the field together with their lentils and warm porridge in hand, I think it would have been very hard for me.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. What I find powerful. I'm also the oldest of 4, Marc, so I've also been in this situation.
But you
It's
turned
wonderful.
out good. Yeah,
No, it's wonderful. When we were kids, we had a lot of conflicts. As we've grown older, my brothers and I have become very, very close. And that's been a wonderful, wonderful process. Sigmund Freud, the great psychoanalyst, the great father of psychoanalysis, imagined that the primary dynamic which shapes human personality and shapes human history is the Oedipal dynamic, which is the relationship between the child and the parent, particularly the opposite sex parent, the son who craves intimacy with his mother and has to have conflict with his father, and then resolves that conflict by becoming the father. The Bible has this other idea, which is it's our sibling relationships that shape our character. That in the conflict with siblings, we discover who we are, we discover the parts of ourselves that are missing. And that what's wonderful about this story is that Jacob, who is going to be the progenitor of the people Israel, we're going to be Bnei Yisrael, his children, he's discovering in his transactions with Esau and his transactions with his father, the parts of himself that are missing, the parts of himself that are gone, that need to be filled in. And that's what the story is really about. I mean, the critical line in the story, the line that's the marquee line in the story is when he enters the tent of his father with the food, and the father right away suspects something's going on, because the first question is, who are you? Which is such a deep question on so many levels. It's not just which my sons are you, it's who are you? Who do you want to be? What do you want to be like? And when he says, I am your eldest son, and then Yitzchak rather replies that the hands are the hands of Esau, but the voice is the voice of Yaakov. You, my boy, are incomplete. You, my boy, have the verbal acuity and the mental capacity, but you don't have the power to do stuff in the world, and you don't have the loyalty and love of your brother. And that's the beginning of a development of a character, and that's what we're seeing in this story. Now, what makes the story so difficult is that there's an act of theft. Something's being stolen here. At first, it's the birthright, if you can possibly steal a birthright, but the blessing is certainly being stolen. And Marc is exactly right. The mother is set up here as the manipulator, and it's a vicious vision. And she is, after all, the sister of Laban. And we're going to find out who Lavan is next week, because Laban is the master manipulator who's going to teach Jacob the lesson of what happens when you manipulate for a living. But let's take up this question. Can you steal a birthright? Can you steal a blessing? What does it mean to steal? What does it do to a family? What does it do to any social circle, social circumstance, when somebody crosses the line and steals. Let's begin. Sherre, you want to take this one?
Sure. I love this concept in this parsha of stealing because, first of all, I don't understand how you steal a birthright. I am always the youngest in my family. I don't know how in my right mind, and Marc, you and I talk about this, like, how can you actually steal your position? It's not something you can steal.
No.
You just can't. And then the blessing, what does it mean to steal a blessing? Like, we always think of stealing as, like in third grade, I stole a caramel from Safeway, right? We think of stealing as something tangible, but we don't think of all the metaphysical things that we steal from people, like a blessing or time. Like when people say to me, I never steal, and they come 15 minutes late to a meeting, I want to say, actually, you steal time, right? Like there's all these things that are non-tangible that we steal. And I think the parsha is shining a light on that by first saying, what are those things that you can identify that you steal? What are those things that you can't identify? And are there things that you think can never be stolen? It's impossible, and they're stolen. So it's a breakdown of three categories. Marc?
Yeah, I mean, this is Genevat Dat. The rabbis made a whole category of stealing, since to me, that's the greatest of all the commandments. Lo tignob, do not steal. To me, it's within our control. It transforms our life. It shapes our life. It's by far the number one. And Kant agreed with that. He used that as an example of the categorical imperative. But the rabbis had a wonderful expansion of the notion of theft, because as we were speaking before, Sherre, we think of theft as a tangible thing. You steal someone's bike or you steal someone's papers. No. The worst stealing is the stealing of knowledge, the stealing of the reality of what is, not a tangible thing. And so rabbis include some wonderful things, like when you sell fruit, you can't put it in a beautiful basket, which will show off the fruit, because that's Genevat Dat. When I think of it always in the grocery stores where they used to have meat counters, and instead of everything wrapped in plastic, and they had those lights. I guess I don't know what kind of lights they had, but they made the meat look much redder than it really is, and that's Genevat Dat. And all advertising, when you think about it, almost all 100% of advertising is Genevat Dat. I remember being entranced by all the stuff they sold on the Saturday cartoon shows. And eventually there was a law passed that when they showed what you were buying, they couldn't show it with all sorts of backgrounds and stuff and other stuff in there. It just had to be what you were buying without all that stuff. And because it was Genevat Dat for children, and children are very vulnerable to Genevat Dat.
But I think it expands even greater. It's Genevat Dat is not just how it's being marketed, but I work with a lot of women in midlife, and often there's a situation where there's a betrayal in a marriage, and they, one partner says they stole the partner of someone, right? They had an affair, but is it the partner, or did they steal the opportunity for the couple to wrestle with their own struggles? Right? Like we automatically place it on that which we can see and identify that as the object of the stealing. But what did you really steal? Did you steal the opportunity for the couple to have a conversation? Because people justify and rationalize their stealing. Well, they weren't happy. They were already in a bad marriage. But what did you really steal? So I think it translates much bigger than just advertising. It's stealing beneath what you think you're taking, even if it's justified. Does that make sense, Eddie?
Yeah, I want to just say there's points where it is justified. And this is also fascinating to me about the deep wisdom of the rabbis. In addition to knowing that Genevat Dat is, as you say, Sherre, much bigger than just lying, it's a whole fabric of deception. There are moments when it's a mitzvah to lie. It's a mitzvah to deceive. So and there's a wonderful book by Cicely Bach online. She was the
Now
one.
you've switched, sorry, you switched from lying to stealing. And
Yes,
I think
because
those are
lying is an
different.
act of stealing.
Correct,
Lying,
but I think you have to make that distinction. I mean, Eddie,
Yeah.
you and I have talked about this. I'm interested to hear what you think.
yeah, it's about lying. But the point is, if you're asked, is the bride beautiful? You're required to lie. You're required to say, yes, she's beautiful. Even if was a miskite before she got married, she's a miskite at the wedding, and she's a miskite afterwards. No, you have to say she's beautiful. And for the Franks, who are hiding Jews,
Marc?
yeah, and another occasion where it's a mitzvah to lie is, of course, the case of Anne Frank and the thousands of other people who hid Jews. Nazi guy comes to the front door and says, "Are you hiding Jews?" The right answer, of course, is no, I'm not hiding Jews. So to save a life, to keep someone's self-image up, you're required to lie. So what the rabbis understood is that life and lying and deception and Geneva dat, they're very, very complex issues because our relationships are complex.
Right. So the Mishnah, so the locus of this is the Mishnah, which is the great code of law of the 2nd century. It's the code, it's the core of the Talmudic tradition. And the Talmudic tradition says, just as you can steal objects, you can do this thing called Genevas dat. You can steal an idea. You could steal, what is Geneva dat? You deceive using words. And the example, and the Mishnah almost never gives you an example when it sets out an ethical principle, but here it gives an example because it's a slightly abstract principle. And you've given some examples. The one that the Mishnah offers is a very interesting one. You're not allowed to ask the price of an object from a vendor, from a seller, unless you really have some intention of buying it. Now, that sounds so innocuous, right? You're at the airport and you're waiting for a flight, and the airline announces that the flight is going to be delayed for some time. So you go wandering around the shops of the airport, and let's say there's a camera shop, and you walk into the camera shop. Now, you have no intention in the world of buying a camera, but you engage the clerk, the gentleman, the lady working in the shop, in kind of, show me this one, show me that one. How much does this cost? How much does that? You have no intention of buying. You're just killing time. What's being stolen there, number one? And what's the ethical violation? Like, what's wrong with that? Isn't that why they're there? Right? And the answer is, of course, that first of all, you're stealing that person's time. You're raising that person's expectations that you might be interested in making a sale, which is, after all, why they're there. But you know you're not, and they think you are. And it's that dissymmetry. And the deepest issue is that you think it's okay to do that sort of thing to somebody else, because in some ways your time is more valuable than theirs, your person is more valuable than theirs, and you can play with them in that way. The modern equivalent of this, which has happened to me many times, and I've tried to develop my own ethic about this, is I buy a lot of things online, but sometimes I actually want to go look at it. So if I go into a store, if I go to Best Buy and I see the object that I'm interested in buying, and I want to see the alternatives, and the salesperson comes over, but I'm thinking I'm going to buy it on Amazon because it's cheaper, right? I have to tell the person, hey, listen, I'm just looking. I'm just looking. I don't want you to think that I want to respect your person, your being in this situation. And this becomes a really interesting question about when we buy things online, what do we say to those who actually sell them to us?
Well, also to add to it is the comparison shopping, right? I'm trying to look for the best price, and I'm taking your time in order to figure out what's the best thing for me, disregarding that it's your time, your energy, and all that. And I think your example was a great one with the internet shopping, Eddie, because, I literally announced, I am comparing prices. I want to be very clear about what my intentions are. And you are entitled to say, you know what? I'm not interested. Done. And I've done this very rigorously with my children, like, especially like Levi, the youngest one, who always wants to go see the Pokemon cards in the store. And he wants to know which one they have and which ones they don't. And so I say, if you're going to buy a pack of Pokemon cards, you can go in there and start with, my plan is to buy a pack of Pokemon cards. I mean, of course, he's 12, right? But don't go in there sort of like asking them to take out all the different Pokemon cards, show you all the different versions and then walk out being like, hey, mom, be intentional, be clear, and be honest.
This is amazing to me because we all three do the same thing. I do
Yeah.
exactly the same thing and tell the person, look, I'm not going to buy, but I've actually added a little twist to it because I say, look, I'll probably buy it on Amazon because they're cheaper. Do you have a policy in this store that you'll match Amazon's price? And I've been in Best Buy a few times and they said, absolutely. We're happy you said that. And we have a policy. I'll look it up for you. I'll look up the price on Amazon and I'll meet that price. If it's lower than our price, I'll meet it. So it's about
Can we
honesty.
just share shopping stories for 1 sec? I was taking Emmett to college and we were shopping at Bed Bath & Beyond. We went into the store. We did exactly what we would do according to Torah law. And the woman said to me, I have a better idea. Why don't I get online, buy it through our website, adjust all the prices, and then I'll have it sent to your college. And we sat there for an hour and a half while she did this process. But I said to my son, this is what is the right thing to do because she gave us that opportunity.
Yeah. Or the guy will say to you, I know you can buy it for a little bit less online, but if you ever have trouble with it, you're going to have a much harder time getting that online vendor to respond to your issues than I'm right here. And I'm in the community and it's worth the extra money. And that's actually sold me on a case. But let's take this one more step because there's another world to this, guys, which is now very important in the world as we know it. There's a whole version of online dating, of online relationships.
Oh my God, yes.
Yes, but you want to talk about Genevas Dat?
Oh my
Want to talk
God.
about deception and stealing and presenting an image that's not true? Let's talk about JDate and JSwipe and Match.com and Tinder and all these things where people are engaged in intimate relationships and present themselves as they are not. And what are the ethics of, and someone has to write this as a Gemara. There is not yet a Talmud of internet transactions in the intimate world. And this is dying for a new Mishnah, a new Talmudic discussion of what are the ethics of going on to these sites and dealing with these relationships.
There's a thing literally called catfishing, right? This is what the Talmud needs to be written about. Catfishing is when you present yourself online as one way, and then in the reality, you're completely and utterly different. And it is a whole legal category of people that do this for a living, that are catfishers. And there's TV shows written about it. And there needs to be like a halacha of catfishing.
And it is, even if it's not quite, as completely deceptive as something like catfishing, but if I put up a profile of myself and I exaggerate, how much of an exaggeration are you allowed to say? If I'm not 5'12", 5'10", I'm 5'6", is that possible?
But
if
also,
I'm 10 years older than I tell you I am,
but it's I think that exaggerating is also in that stealing. Right? Like I'm a storyteller. I love to exaggerate. I like to tell the story, and make it beautiful and make it scrumptious, right? And I really have to monitor and self-regulate when my storytelling goes into exaggerating, when it goes into that place of deception, when it goes into the place of stealing. And we do that all the time. We want to impress. We want people to like us for 100 reasons. So I think a lot about exaggeration.
I had lunch with Stephen King once, and at lunch he says, Rabbi, writers are liars. Just like that, he said to me, writers are liars. Because, we're inventing everything. And it just stuck with me because that impulse, Sherre, when you're a storyteller, is not a bad impulse as long as you're exaggerating the story. If you exaggerate you, that's a different matter. So the thing is, in the new Mishnah, Eddie, which you should write. I'm into Agada. You're into Halacha, so you should write it. But if you lie, for example, about the bride who's beautiful, it's not self-serving. Anything that's self-serving and a lie is prohibited.
I actually, between us, Mark, I actually read that I know that beautiful, beautiful piece of Talmud between Hillel and Shammai.
Yeah.
And I always read it in the idea that what Shammai was really saying to Hillel is not that you should lie about the bride, but that every bride is beautiful, and that you should reflect that woman's feelings on that day as she stands there as the bride. And that we should, that's it's the inner light of a bride who's on this very special day of her life, so that it really isn't a lie to say that she is, kala na'ava chasida. She's a beautiful and graceful bride.
Eddie, you're too nice.
I know,
You've
but I
done
love
too many
weddings. I love
I'm
weddings.
telling you, Eddie,
You know
I
what?
love
I don't
I
care
love
what
it.
people think about me.
I love it.
It ain't true.
Well, let's look
Not
at-
it's like the pictures of the babies. Some who look like monkeys. Almost all babies look like monkeys.
Oh,
Why do
Mark,
we need
that
to-
presumes that you believe there is a beauty and a standard that is right. It's so wrong. And I
You're
love
looking
your
with
reading.
the
There's a
wrong
bracha
eyes,
about
Gellman.
beauty. There's a bracha about seeing a beautiful person. It's not a bracha
Okay, but
about
has the
seeing
rabbi
any
worked-
person, any person. No, there is a real thing about beauty, and the rabbis in their deep wisdom understood this.
Right.
I mean,
right.
all those tests, a beautiful woman asks for
All
a
right.
cab, an ugly one.
Okay, let's not
Or
go,
the
go there.
teenager,
Not good.
yeah.
Gellman.
It's not good Torah.
Gellman, you're looking with the wrong eyes.
No, I am, but I'm looking with honest
You
eyes.
remember there was a very famous story that the famous dancer Isadora Duncan once wrote a letter to the writer George Bernard Shaw, and she said, "Mr. Shaw, you are the wisest man in the world, and I'm the most beautiful woman. Let's get together and have children. They'll be extraordinary." And he wrote back to her and says, "Yes, my dear, but what if they?" Because she said, "The children will come out looking like me, but thinking like you." And he wrote back and said, "Yes, but what would happen if they came out looking like me and thinking like you?" That's a problem. The story ends. Jacob gets the blessing and the birthright, and the brother Esav comes into the father. And when he realizes that his blessing has been purloined, there is a moment, a powerful moment in the story when he cries. And for the first time, you feel sorry for him. For the first time, you feel the brokenness of this brother, because he may be crude and he may be coarse and he may be gross, but he's lovable. I mean, he's loyal to his parents. And he cries, and the words are, "Have you not a blessing for me, Father?
Have you
Abba,
just one blessing?
Have you just one blessing? Though you don't have a blessing for me." And your heart breaks. And there is a powerful midrash on that statement that says the Messiah will only come when Esav runs out of tears. Because the brother who feels like he has been cheated, this is the source of aggression. This is the source of violence. This is the brokenness of the world that we live in. Then he swears a vendetta against his brother Jacob. Jacob has to leave home to save his life. He runs out of the home. We'll deal with that story next week. And the family explodes. Who in this family could possibly talk to each other anymore? Can Isaac and Rebecca face each other anymore? Rebecca having deceived Isaac? Can Esav ever be whole with his parents anymore, having had this experience? And the two brothers, Jacob is running away from a vendetta. He's been promised that, he's been told he's going to be killed. And what happens at this moment, the image that's left at the end of the Torah report, it's a bitter image. It's a bitter taste in your mouth. When this happens to brothers, then the family has no integrity. This is the end of the family. I mean, there's such a deep warning to there, and so the remedy to this, of course, is the line that we all know from the book of Psalms that we sing as the most famous Jewish camp song or campfire song ever. Hine matovu manayim shevet achim gam yachad. How wonderful and how terribly rare it is when brothers can dwell together. How do you heal this family? That's the great question. What do you think? Is there any way to heal this family? Sherre, this family comes into your office looking for family counseling. What do you say to them?
Oh, I love that imagery, Eddie. I just kept thinking that tears are external despair. Like when you literally cry, you're just externally demonstrating that you are broke. And you're letting everybody else know that when they're cries of despair. And I don't know what I would say. This family implodes. It's just such a sad story. And is there healing after this kind of implosion? Are there things that break a family apart and they can't be mended? Are there things that are so egregious that forgiveness isn't possible? I don't know.
Marc, can this family be healed?
No, no. You know, and I know lots of families that break up. I mean, families stay together. My theory about it is that God creates glue people. That's what I call them. These are people who stick other people together. Both of you are glue people. I'm a person who's not a glue person, but it's people in a family who, no matter what, they want to keep people together. And they want their call of every birthday and everything, and they always have a positive view about everything. Those are glue people. And when I bury a glue person in a family, which is otherwise filled with people who are always arguing with each other, I know the family is doomed. You need a glue person to keep a family together. You need somebody, at least one, usually one is enough, to say, I don't care what you think happened or what this happened. I just want you to be in touch with each other, to love each other, and I'm not giving up on you. And those are the people who keep families alive.
I have to say, Mark, just as you said that, I literally thought of so many families, but in my own family, my mom was our glue.
Yeah, yeah. My
Right.
mother was that glue too. My mother was that glue.
And the question is over time, and we'll see this in the next 2 weeks, because this is the story of the next 2 weeks of the Torah. Is that the next 2 weeks, the question is, can each of the characters of this story find a narrative which allows them to step back into the encounter that is family? And we'll see if that happens. And I don't want to leave you on a sour taste. There is something coming which will bring us some hope. And that, I think, is really, there is a narrative that they can embrace with each other that might help them understand that, yes, you've been wounded deeply, but that's not the last word of our relationship. It's not the last word of this family. It's not the last word of these ethics. And that, I promise you, to everyone who's listening, that's still coming. Before we finish, I just want to take one moment, because it is important to recognize this. Here in Los Angeles, the Jewish community here has sustained a terrible tragedy this last week. A young person died very tragically. And many of the friends of that young person are now grieving so very terribly, including one of Sherry's children. And I want to say just a moment of warning and blessing to the community. The pandemic has left so many of us with deep feelings of anxiety, of depression, of loneliness, of isolation, and of desperation. Those of us who are grown-ups are pretty much equipped to deal with these things. We've had these experiences before in our lives, and we know how to deal with it. And if we don't know how to deal with it, we have enough wisdom and resources to go out and find some help. But many of the young people in our community, particularly teenagers, don't have those resources. And the difficulties of this moment of isolation, of catastrophe, of social catastrophe and upheaval, have weighed heavily on their minds and on their hearts. So I want to make a plea to moms and dads, grandmas and grandpas, friends, that if there's a young person in your life and they're telling you that they are anxious, depressed, they're telling you that life is getting too hard for them to handle, take that seriously. Don't think this is just teenage angst and brush it off with a silly comment, but get that child into some help. There's plenty of resources. There are plenty of mental health resources, rabbis and teachers and therapists and groups and teaching and teachers, and lots of places that you can go to get help. And it's always better to overreact to these things than to underreact, because a child can use someone to talk to That's always going to be helpful. And if the kid says, no, I'm just, you say, okay, well, let's go talk. Let's go sit with a professional and talk. Let's make sure that you have the inner strength that you, that you need to get through what's a very difficult moment. Don't underestimate how psychologically devastating this isolation, social distancing, the upheaval of the last year and a half has been on the young people in the community. Sherre, I know that you've dealt with this very closely from your own family.
Yeah, I just yesterday on Biachad Together, spirited by AJU, we interviewed Ivan Meisel, Stanford sports writer for ESPN. His son as a junior at RIT walked off a pier behind their house and onto the frozen lake, and his body was discovered 2.5 months later. And one of the things Ivan said was, I wish I had been more aggressive. I wish I had asked more questions. And I feel that all the time as a parent. This is a very hard time to raise children. One of my daughters always says to me, why are you asking my friends all these questions? You're like the investigator, because her friends know her far better and have spoken to her a lot longer than I've ever spoken to her. And they know her best. And so I'm constantly the detective, the investigator, they call me the Rabbi Oprah because I won't stop asking questions. And she gets so embarrassed, annoyed, angry. There's been a lot of slamming of the doors. I will not invite my friends over if you continue to ask questions. And guess what? Not stopping.
And guess what? It's the thing she wants you to do most. And it's a very valuable parenting move. So please take this with some seriousness. The young people in our community have had a very, very rough time. And let's embrace them and give them the resources to grow healthy in this community. Thank you for being part of today's Torah study, Rabbi Sherre, Rabbi Marc. Thank you to everyone who's listened. Following this, of course, services from Valley Beth Shalom. It's our second episode in deep dive in davening. We're going to be presenting a service with some learning together about this prayer book. And our friend Robert Ian, one of the world's great jazz cellists, is going to be presenting some music this morning. Bob is one of the members of our community, and he prays through his cello, and that is a gift for all of us. So please join us, and we wish everyone a very, very happy and healthy Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.